The Middle East has been the setting for several of the most significant events in human history. From the rise of the first civilizations, the great classical empires, to the emergence of the religions with the most followers on earth, and a good part of the bloodiest and most heroic battles in history. However, in recent years, this same land has witnessed the most complex and controversial military, political, and religious conflicts. The conflict we're dealing with in this video is the so-called Israeli-Iranian conflict, which has involved the State of Israel on one side and the Islamic Republic of Iran on the other. Two rival nations, each vowing to destroy the other, have caused major consequences both regionally and globally. However, we have to ask ourselves, was it always like this? Or was there a time when both nations were cordial? What are, in summary, the reasons for the current conflict between Iran and Israel? Join us as we answer all these questions in today's video. I'm Alejandro Andrade, and this is the New Encyclopedia. And before we start with today's story, I want to invite you to support our channel. Subscribe, like this video, share it with your friends, leave your opinions in the comment section, and turn on notifications so you don't miss any new episodes. And without further ado, let's get straight to today's topic. Before discussing the Iran-Israel conflict, it's important to review both nations' long and complex histories. For many centuries, the Jewish people lived in diaspora after the destruction of the Second Temple of Jerusalem by the Roman Empire in the year 70 AD. This marked the beginning of a dispersion across various regions of the world, especially in Europe, North Africa, and the Middle East. And despite being geographically dispersed, the Jews maintained a common identity based on their religion, their traditions, and their historical and spiritual connection to the ancient land of Israel. Towards the end of the 19th century, the political Zionist movement emerged, led by Theodor Herzl. This ideology held that the Jews were not only a religious group, but a people with the right to national self-determination and to establish their own state. For historical, cultural, and religious reasons, which we discuss further in other videos like the one on Golda Meir. Zionism proposed to establish that state in the region then known as Palestine, a name inherited from Roman times and which at that time was under the control of the Ottoman Empire. This region was considered by the Zionists as the ancestral homeland of the Jewish people, and for that reason, it became the center of their national aspirations. In that context, from the late 19th century, and especially between 1882 and 1914, thousands of Jews sympathetic to Zionism began to migrate to Palestine in several waves known as Aliyot. This situation created tensions with sectors of the local Arab population, who began to perceive Jewish migration as a threat to their demographic and territorial predominance. After World War I, the United Kingdom took control of the territory, and in 1922 received the British mandate for Palestine from the League of Nations. Within this framework, and under the spirit of the 1917 Balfour Declaration, Jewish immigration to the territory was facilitated, which increased tensions with the Arab-Palestinian population. These tensions erupted violently during the Great Arab Revolt of 1936, in protest against Jewish immigration and British control, laying the foundations for the prolonged conflict between both populations. Shortly after, overwhelmed by the violence and the scale that the conflict between Jews and Palestinians had reached, the United Kingdom asks the United Nations to intervene to resolve this conflict. In this regard, on November 29, 1947, the United Nations issues Resolution 181, also known as the Partition Plan for Palestine, in which they divide the disputed area between a Jewish state and an Arab state, seeking to give both states the same amount of territory. However, neither Jews nor Arabs accept the resolution. As a result, on May 14, 1948, The main leaders of the Jewish agency proclaim and sign the Declaration of Independence of the newly formed State of Israel. Immediately, the British leave the territory, and the so-called 1948 Arab-Israeli War breaks out between the Jews and the Palestinians supported by the Arab League. The war lasts just over a year and ends with armistices signed between Israel and Arab League member countries. After this conflict, Israel is positioned as a new powerful state with aims for total expansion over the formerly Arab-Palestinian territory. This is an action they will carry out in the years to come. This is where we must leave the history of the State of Israel and mention the history of Iran. In ancient times, the territory of Iran, located between the Caspian Sea and the Persian Gulf, was inhabited by a very diverse group of Indo-European tribes known as the Iranian people, who went on to form several kingdoms and empires in that region. However, after the Muslim conquest in 651 AD, Iran became part of the famous Umayyad Caliphate until the year 750. From 750 to 1055, it belonged to the Abbasid Caliphate, whose center of power was Baghdad. Despite belonging to these caliphates, the region of Iran developed small dynasties that economically ruled certain areas of the territory, such as the Buyids and Seljuks. In the year 1501, one of these dynasties, called the Safavid dynasty, took the fundamental step in forming a truly Iranian political entity. They began a military campaign that culminated in 1509 with the independence of the Iranian territory from the Abbasid Caliphate and other regional states. In addition, the Safavids consolidated the territory and established a hereditary monarchy under the figure of the Shah, that is, the emperor. In turn, they promoted the Shia branch of Islam as the official religion of Iran, which sets it apart from the rest of the Arab world, which is mostly Sunni, and it represents a fundamental milestone in the formation of Iranian nationality. The other dynasties that rise after the end of the Safavids will continue to a greater or lesser extent, and not without several moments of crisis, the unifying and centralizing work of the Safavids. Thus, in 1794, the Qajar dynasty will arrive. In 1906, this dynasty will be the protagonist of one of the most unprecedented events in Iranian history, which is called the Constitutional Revolution. Iran, which had been opening up to the Western world for decades, it drafts a constitution that turns the territory into a constitutional monarchy, limits the powers of the Shah, and establishes a parliament and the position of a prime minister. Finally, in 1921, the Qajar dynasty is overthrown when Reza Pahlavi takes power, giving way to the Pahlavi dynasty. 20 years later, in 1941, Reza abdicates and his son, Mohammad Reza Pahlavi, becomes Shah of Iran. From that same year, Pahlavi, allied with the United States, promotes the modernization of the state and the industrialization of the country. With this, Iran becomes one of the most prosperous and influential countries in the region. Pahlavi also manages to eliminate most of his political opposition. He also promotes, despite the nation's Muslim majority, the establishment of a secular state. This results in a situation of relative cultural and religious freedom. It is shortly after this that, as we saw in 1948, the Jews founded the State of Israel, whose existence radically transformed the geopolitical landscape of the region. It will be a key event in the conflicts involving Iran and Israel in the coming years. Nevertheless, despite practicing different religions and having opposing forms of government, the State of Israel and Iran maintained good diplomatic relations for a long time. This began with Iran's recognition of the newly established State of Israel in 1950, making it the second Muslim country to recognize it, after Turkey. This decision was motivated by the search for regional alliances to counter the hostility of neighboring Arab countries toward Israel, with whom both Iran and Israel shared common interests, especially in matters of security and economy. In fact, during the 1950s, Shah Mohammad Reza Pahlavi consolidated his power with direct support from the United States and the United Kingdom, who orchestrated the overthrow of then Prime Minister Mohammad Mossadegh. The latter had tried to nationalize the Iranian oil industry, challenging British and American interests in the region. And although Israel does not participate directly in the operation, it maintains strategic ties with the Shah's regime as part of a broader regional alliance. In this way, Iranians and Jews develop a mutually beneficial binational relationship, which is evident in the secret and smooth cooperation in military intelligence and economic fields. Well, from the 1950s until the late 1970s, Israel and Iran collaborated in the formation of security forces and in joint projects. They maintained representative offices, although without formal embassies, to avoid visible diplomatic tensions. Thus, for example, during the 1970s, Iran supplied oil to Israel through bilateral agreements and shared pipelines, even secretly, due to the lack of formal diplomatic relations. During the global energy crisis caused by the Yom Kippur War in 1973, Iran, although it did not participate in the oil embargo led by the Arab Organization of the Petroleum Exporting Countries, did benefit from the rise in crude oil prices and continued exporting oil, maintaining a more pragmatic stance regarding its economic relations with the West and Israel. And in return, Israel reciprocated Iran's assistance mainly through military and intelligence cooperation, providing training, weapons, and support in the formation of the Iranian secret police, called Sazaman-e-Etla'at va'Amniat-e-Keshvar. Israel also shared agricultural and defense technology, joined infrastructure projects, and kept active bilateral trade with Iran. This strategic alliance also included an exchange of information to counter common regional threats, benefiting both countries in a context of tensions with the Arab regimes and the growing Soviet influence. However, this relationship was abruptly broken in 1979 after a massive wave of protests against Shah Mohammad Reza Pahlavi and the triumph of the Islamic Revolution, led by the Shiite leader Ruhollah Khomeini, who became the supreme leader of the new Islamic Republic of Iran. Starting from February 11 of that same year, Khomeini, a defender of a theocratic vision of Shia Islam, established a political system based on Sharia, interpreted from the Twelver Shia school. Under his leadership, strict social rules were imposed, such as the mandatory use of the veil for women, which have generated controversy both inside and outside the country to this day. At the same time, the new regime broke off relations with Israel, which it no longer recognized as a legitimate state and labeled as an enemy of Islam and an oppressor of the Palestinian people. In addition, it nationalized strategic sectors such as oil, drastically reduced the influence of the United States in Iran, and adopted an anti-imperialist rhetoric, although it did not take an active part in international leftist movements, which in many cases it also repressed. This positioned Iran as a new regional force, challenging Western interests and those of the State of Israel itself. In this way, during the 1980s and 1990s, Iran and Israel would engage in what is called a proxy war. That is, a type of conflict in which two or more powers use third parties as intermediaries instead of confronting each other directly. This was because, at that time, there were other regimes in the Middle East, such as Saddam Hussein's in Iraq and Hafez al-Assad's in Syria. These governments worried the United States and Israel much more than Khomeini's Iran. However, even so, there were frequent and violent clashes between Iran and Israel. For example, after its emergence following the Israeli invasion of southern Lebanon in 1982, The armed group Hezbollah actively receives support from Iran's Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps. The same will occur in 1987 with the creation of the armed group Hamas. The State of Israel tolerates the growth of this terrorist group as a counterbalance to the Palestine Liberation Organization. It is even assumed that Hamas was strengthened with logistical and military support from Israel and the United States. But is this theory true? Hamas grows rapidly and begins to receive support from Iran to fight against Israel. And the same will happen with other important armed groups like Islamic Jihad. In this way, the confrontations involving Iran and Israel will not be on a larger scale until the 21st century arrived, when there was a rise in tensions that led to a direct confrontation between both nations, and not a proxy war as had been happening before. With the arrival of the 21st century, a fundamental event marks the beginning of a new stage in the conflict between Iran and Israel. It is possible that Iran could build nuclear weapons. This represented a direct threat to Israel, a country that, although it has not officially acknowledged it, is presumed to possess a significant nuclear arsenal, and it has expressed its opposition to other Middle Eastern nations gaining access to similar technological capabilities. The prospect of a nuclear-armed Iran intensified regional and global tensions, initiating a political, military, and diplomatic escalation between the two countries. The Iranian nuclear program was nothing new. In fact, it had come to the country between the 1950s and 1970s through American support for Shah Pahlavi. The controversy escalated in 2002 when Iranian dissidents exposed 2 secret nuclear material processing sites in Iran. What put these unknown facilities in the eye of the storm? Since 2003, Iran had shown itself willing not so much to shut down its nuclear program, but rather to develop it in accordance with the demands of the international community, in exchange for a relaxation of the restrictions and embargoes imposed on the country. This was despite actions such as the assassination claimed by Israel of 4 scientists involved in the program. However, in 2018, President Donald Trump reinstated the restrictions and trade embargoes on Iran, which in response restarted its nuclear program with the aim of developing weapons. This, moreover, with significant support from Russia and China. The restart of the nuclear program, with all its dangerous implications, sparks a new stage of conflict. In 2018, Israel made public a large number of secret Iranian documents that showed Iran's efforts to hide nuclear activities during the supposed freeze period sponsored by the international community. In 2019, Israel assassinated another scientist from Iran's nuclear program. After this, Iran and its allies, such as Syria, respond with missile and drone attacks on Israeli military targets, which, due to Israel's advanced military technology, have very little effect. However, Israel responds to these with several cyber attacks on military and civilian facilities in different regions of Iran, with the main objective being organized sabotage in those locations. This whole situation will lay the groundwork for a direct and open confrontation between the two countries starting in 2024, which is the one that concerns us today. In light of current events, it's worth making some important clarifications to put the current situation into context. Although Iran has taken an openly hostile stance toward the State of Israel since 1979, it currently does not have military, technological, or economic capabilities equivalent to those of the Israelis. However, it has regional networks of influence and advanced weaponry that give it significant response capabilities. For its part, Israel, with its air superiority, technological edge, and Western diplomatic support, has carried out a series of strategic military operations that have set the tone in the recent conflict. In the context of the ongoing conflict in the Gaza Strip, which resumed in October 2023, Israel carried out operations in Syria between December 2023 and January 2024, in which high-ranking Iranian commanders, such as Syed Rasim Hussein, were killed. On April 1, 2024, the Israeli Defense Forces launched an airstrike on the Iranian consulate in Damascus, an unprecedented event. Diplomats said it raised bilateral tensions to historic levels. Between April 13 and 14, 2024, Iran launched an operation it called True Promise, consisting of a barrage of drones and ballistic missiles against Israeli territory. According to Israeli sources, the attack was largely intercepted thanks to the air defense system and international cooperation. However, the event marked the first direct military attack by Iran on Israel since the beginning of their modern rivalry in 1979. Israel's response to Iran's attack was swift. On April 19, 2024, the first Israeli drone attacks on Iranian territory were reported. A month later, on May 19, 2024, the Iranian president Ibrahim Raisi died in a strange and suspicious helicopter accident in the northwest of the country. Although the authorities attributed the crash to technical causes, the tense geopolitical context gave rise to multiple unconfirmed theories about possible external involvement. On September 27, 2024, the leader of Hezbollah, Hassan Nasrallah, was killed in an Israeli airstrike in Beirut. His death, confirmed by Hezbollah and international sources, prompted an immediate response from Iran. On October 1, Tehran launched 181 ballistic missiles against Israeli territory. Although most were intercepted, several hit civilian areas in Tel Aviv and the West Bank. In response, Israel carried out a massive air offensive using more than 100 aircraft and 200 missiles to attack command centers, missile factories, and military bases on Iranian soil. This operation caused hundreds of casualties and severe damage to Iran's defensive infrastructure. Several months later, in April 2025, an attempt is made to open a diplomatic channel between Supreme Leader Ali Khamenei and then United States President Donald Trump, with the goal of containing the escalation. However, the talks failed, mainly due to Iran's refusal to suspend its nuclear program. The regime reiterated its ideological stance of not recognizing Israel as a legitimate state and reaffirmed its resistance to international pressure. June 13, 2025. Israel launches Operation Rising Lion, a massive offensive against Iran's military and nuclear facilities, including the Natanz plant and strategic targets in Tehran. In that operation, General Hossein Salami, commander of the Islamic Revolutionary Guard, died along with other high-ranking officials. His death was confirmed by Iranian state media and international agencies, representing a significant blow to Iran's military leadership. Currently, both countries continue to exchange attacks and threats, with a growing number of victims and strong international alarm over the possibility of a larger-scale conflict. In the Middle East, Israel maintains a policy of offensive containment, while Iran has declared a state of emergency and promises new reprisals. This marks one of the most critical and dangerous phases of their historic enmity. Thank you very much for staying with us until the end of the video. If you enjoyed it, don't forget to leave us a like, subscribe, activate the notification bell so you don't miss any new content from the channel, and share it with your friends through social networks like WhatsApp or Facebook. Remember that by doing this, you help us a lot to reach new people. So thank you all from the bottom of my heart for following and supporting us, and we'll see you next time.